Hey guys, Coach Driscoll here back. I'm going to go through our nutrition unit, and I'm using this as a review, but it's certainly good the first time you even go through this. I want to first kind of go over the objective for as we get started here, and then I'll change the objective as we kind of go into a different section. So basically just being able to recall the terms that are in here and kind of get a basic understanding of the macronutrients and really what calories do to our bodies. So we're going over nutrition. And I'll downsize my screen here so you can see the PowerPoint. So nutrition is the science or study of food, and that's what we're going through. And then nutrients are really the crux of what our nutrition unit's about. So what's in the food is really determining not just weight, which we're going to talk about calories in just a second, but it's really determining the type of food and the type of weight that we're actually adding on or what we're putting in our body. So we think more of nutrients as vitamins and minerals, but more specifically, they could be carbohydrates, fat, protein, or even water. So we'll get into that here in just a little bit. Here are the 6 macronutrients, so if you need to pause and write these down. So here's the technical definition of calories, but more specifically, what you need to know is that calories are the measurement of energy in food. Foods that have more calories are going to last longer. Foods that have less calories are going to be short-lasting, and we'll get into that, talk about that some with carbohydrates actually here in a minute. It relates really easily to that. I have a visual for you to understand how calories affect your weight. Calories are important as we talk about nutrition, but it's not the end-all be-all in terms of defining how healthy somebody is. On the left-hand side, we've got someone who's got weight gain. So if you can imagine, the left side is your eating and drinking, and on the right side is your actual physical activity. So someone who is consuming more food than they're burning off, they're going to gain weight. And on the scale on the far right, it's the exact opposite. This person is losing weight because they're burning more calories than they're actually consuming. And then the scale in the middle is a equal portion, so that person's maintaining their weight. Okay, so this slide here is titled Metabolism, and I'm not going to go into detail about that. On Classroom, if you want to go in, I've got some articles on there, really some myths, things that people are told that we believe. Sometimes we hear things that sound good and we just kind of keep repeating them. And some examples here on this previous slide where we've got things that are not true, but things that have sounded good that we like to continually repeat. And one of the ones in regards to metabolism, for example, is that someone who's skinny has a high metabolism. That's actually not true. People that are quite overweight have much faster metabolisms than we do, or a higher number, and that is really related to their oxygen consumption. And if you want to look up details on that, you can. So as we continue on here, I wanted to bring up one of the major issues that's going on in our culture and society today is just the distortion of the portions that we have. And also on Classroom, there is a quiz that you can go online. It's actually within the PowerPoint if you want to look on that. It'll pull up a link and show you what food was like 30 to 40 years ago. Actually, on the slideshow it says 20, but it's really 30 to 40 years ago that things have really started to change. But here's a good visual of caloric density and how portions can really matter. So on the left side of your screen, there is actually a picture of oil, or you think more of like vegetable oil. Maybe it's 1/10 of that stomach, and it's 400 calories. So if I was going to fill up that entire stomach, it would take me somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 calories just to do that. So I have to get around 4,000 calories. And then beef in the middle, you'd say, well, maybe that's 1/4 of the stomach. So 1,600 calories of beef it would take to fill up my stomach. Versus on the right, we have vegetables, 400 calories. So it is possible for me to get full or be satisfied, in this case, off of vegetables. It just means that I'm going to have to eat a lot, but that's only 400 calories. So significant difference in terms of the type of food and the amount of calories that I'm having as you're going through. And here's just another example, a slide of some things that just because of volume, it doesn't have any impact on how many calories. So a cup of broccoli is only 27 calories and about the exact same size as a piece of chocolate cake, and that's 350. if we're talking weight, you eat a lot of cake, it's going to have an impact on it. Carbohydrates' main purpose is to provide us with energy. It's the main energy providing nutrient, which also means that we need to have more of this nutrient than any other nutrient that we have. It gets a bad rap a lot, and there'll be another slide that I'll talk about that here in just a minute. But 45 to 65% of your diet should be carbohydrates. 1 gram equals 4 calories. Simple carbohydrates are short-lasting in energy. It's 1 or 2 sugar molecules. So carbohydrates really are sugar, and that's a lot of times why they do get a bad rap, but at the same time, that's simple. It's not complex. Complex is a completely different type of molecule, or molecules combined together, as we'll get into that. There's 6 different types of simple carbohydrates. This is not something that you have to know on a test, but certainly if you did, this would obviously get you to an advanced level. That's something that you're wanting to know. So fructose sounds like fruit. That's where it's from. Glucose is actually in your blood. It can also be corn syrup, which is a not very good for you type of sugar, but it's in almost everything that we eat. We can talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And then galactose, it's just present in mammal milk, so you think of cows, goat milk, things like that. Disaccharides are the 2 sugar molecules. It's a simple carbohydrate. And we get some sort of combination of the previous page. So these are the monosaccharides. You combine, make combinations of those, and that's how you get our disaccharides. And you can see on the right-hand side some of those things that you would more commonly see. So, as I mentioned before, simple sugars, or simple carbohydrates are sugars, and this is where the bad rap is. So if you look down here at the list of items, soda, cake, cookies, pastries, cheese, sports drink, pizza, ice cream, hot dogs, bacon. Now you can see why people like carbs are bad. Well, not necessarily. Just particularly these kinds of carbohydrates are not good for us. But we do like to eat them. I'm never going to tell people they shouldn't have these. There are things on this. In fact, all of these things I've probably had within the last 6 months. That doesn't mean that I'm not living the life the way that I should. There's always room for improvement in nutrition, but I'm also a realist and understand that if I'm going to enjoy food, there's things that I like and things that I want to be able to have, and if I can kind of moderate those, then I should be able to do that. So simple sugars raise your blood sugar quite quickly, which is rather important. So I mentioned back here on this page, so I grew up with someone who had type 1 diabetes, and my grandmother even had this as well, and so she constantly had to measure what her blood sugar was. She couldn't have things like this without really being on top of it. It can be quite dangerous, and so that's something that is really important for someone with type 1 or type 2 diabetes, that it's important to kind of stick to a low sugar diet because this thing can get out of whack really quick. As I mentioned before on the next slide, they get a bad rap. It's generally because most of the foods have empty nutritional value. So if you look back on here, what of these things would you say are nutritious? And none of them really probably are. And so people have kind of got this idea that carbohydrates are not good for you at all, which is not true. We're going to get into what type of carbohydrates are good. And we mentioned before that there are fruit, for example, is a simple carbohydrate. Well, that's good for you as well. But so many diets have even gone to the extreme of actually removing carbohydrates from your diet to lose weight. Does it work? Absolutely it works. If you remove carbohydrates from your diet, you will lose weight. If you remove protein from your diet, you will lose weight. And if you remove fat, you will lose weight. If you remove any of those 3, it's going to happen. And the exact opposite happens if you consume any of those 3 in excess. They get stored as fat. But the reality is the type of weight that you're losing isn't the type of weight that you want to lose. Most people would say they want to lose fat weight, but the problem is that when you're losing weight, sometimes it's muscle that you're using. You're losing lean body mass instead of fat weight, and so that can have negative effects too. And sometimes people are so consumed with what the scale says that they're not really getting at the heart of the issue. So carbohydrates are the most important nutrient, as I mentioned before, but the type we should eat more of is complex, which is what we would probably more commonly call good carbohydrates. They're essentially starches, but a lot of times you hear words like whole grain and things like that, whole wheat, those kind of things. And an example of what the difference would be is that there is a nutritional difference between white and brown rice. So brown rice is going to be the more natural form. White rice has removed the brown flour from it, and so it's really changed the nutritional aspect of that. Okay, so we have this starch part where these molecules of carbohydrates. So I mentioned before that like one sugar molecule, or maybe we have two, is what makes up the mono and disaccharides. So complex carbohydrates, if you could imagine, well, here's a good visual. So if I've got one grape on the counter or two grapes, that would be a simple mono and disaccharides versus a actual clump of grapes or a vine. So where I've got a ton of grapes sitting here, that's more complex, so it's going to last longer. And inside of that, where we really get our fiber from. Fiber is a word commonly we think of for older people, but it is really, really important. And the two types of fiber that you'll hear us talk about are soluble and insoluble. There's a distinct difference, and I'll let you read that on the page, but insoluble, more specifically, really kind of helps push through food through our intestines, through our colon, and really aids in that digestive process. And there's some examples down there at the bottom. Versus soluble actually dissolves in water. That is important, but they are both. We need both of them. And then there's an article that kind of talks about the importance of it on Classroom if you want to look at that. But here's an example of what we need for males and females on a daily basis in terms of the amount or need. And that's simply just because by and large average males are larger than females. But at the age of 15, 16 years old, your numbers might be slightly lower. But fiber is a very important thing for your diet. Okay, so getting back into, glycogen is a stored version of carbohydrates, and if you want to get online and kind of look at that, there's another article that kind of goes into more detail what that is. Not necessarily something that you need to know for the test, but it is there for you. It's just kind of a little deeper level of that. And here's a visual of what carbohydrates are. So I have over here on the left-hand side, I have simple. On the right, I have complex. And when we have extra carbohydrates, it does get stored as this glycogen. And the reason that glycogen is important is because specifically if you're an athlete or if you're someone who exercises, you need to have some stored version of that to be able to use rather quickly. When you do things at a lower intensity, you're going to be burning more fat. When you do something at a high intensity, involved in an activity, PE class, where you get active, really sweating, you're really using glycogen stores. So the body is set up that way. The problem is that when we overconsume food over and over and over, the body continues to store it. And after a certain period of time, probably within a day or two, glycogen that is not used gets stored as fat. And that's really where weight starts to continually get added. Now you might ask, well, I can eat all this sorts of food and I never gain weight. Which I had that exact same. In fact, I always called it a problem when I was, 17, 18, 19 years old. I couldn't gain weight. I remember my father was having me drinking these weight gainer shakes and all this stuff trying to gain weight so bad. Now I wish I didn't gain. I gained weight too fast, and I don't eat hardly as much as I used to. It's really based off the activity level that you have personally. So carbohydrates are a good thing, but when we overconsume them, that's something we really have to pay attention to. And a lot of it's because the type of carbohydrates that we like to have are over here on the left. And the ones that we don't necessarily eat enough of are the ones that are over here on the right. So vegetables are over here in this complex carbohydrate side. And vegetables are a carbohydrate. You never hear people mention that carbohydrates are bad, but then vegetables are bad as well. You always hear people say, we need to eat more vegetables, and carbohydrates are bad. Well, or you say carbs, but they're really talking about this, okay? So something to just kind of keep in mind as you go through that. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for now. We'll go through protein on the next one. Next video, so hopefully that helps go through carbohydrates. And again, as always, if you have questions, feel free to email me.